Thanks for tuning in to today's podcast. Please remember that all of the information in this podcast episode is limited to general information only. That means the information is not specific to you, your needs, goals, or objectives. So you should seek the advice of a licensed and trusted financial professional before acting on the information. And before you acquire or apply for a financial product, please read the PDS or product disclosure statement, which should be available on the issuer's website. Lastly, please keep in mind that past performance is not indicative of future performance. In this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast, Kate and I are talking about business pivots, all of those small businesses that have adapted to COVID-19 and the restrictions and kind of made a go of it in spite of all the uncertainty and risks associated with starting a new business. We hear about stories of an eco-accommodation lodge that has turned into a bakery. We hear about stories of personal trainers who now sell kettlebells and all different types of things in this episode. If you run a small business or if your friend or family member does and they've made one of these pivots, we'd love to hear about it. So email us at podcast@rask.com.au, and if we like what we hear and if it's pretty inspirational, we'll share it and promote your business on the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we hope you enjoy this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. Kate, welcome to this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast.
It's good to be back, Owen, on another sunny morning in Melbourne.
Yes, it is indeed. Just looking around my shoulder. It's a bit frosty, but it's lovely. What are we talking about?
Well, hopefully we'll be back doing things in person at the moment, but at the moment we're going to be talking about some of the interesting business pivots and side hustles we've seen over the last few months that have emerged out of the coronavirus. And I've been amazed at some of the things I've seen on Instagram and Twitter and on the news of what people are doing during this time. Like there's been really awful bits, but there's been some amazing examples of businesses turning things around and changing their business model to ensure they survive and can keep employing their staff during this time.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you get a lot of bad news when there's a pandemic on, right? You get like negative, like the morning news reel is just a red background and there's virus and there's this and there's death and whatever. But then, and there's also the economic news like unemployment, business closing. But then there's people, and it's that, if I could conjure my inner politician, the good old Aussie spirit, you know, she'll be right. And people out there just innovating and thinking of cool ways and unique ways to make money and to keep their business afloat. And we've got some of them here. We actually tried to crowdsource some of this. I think you did a lot better job than I did on Instagram.
Yeah, we had some definitely really interesting ideas, but I think, when I was doing some research for this episode, I wrote, is Zoom the obvious winner here? Because, well, they didn't really have to pivot, but they had to do a lot of improvement on their technology because it went from a product that some people use to suddenly a product hundreds of millions of people were using almost overnight. And it became where schools were running their programs. My university was on Zoom suddenly. All the workplaces were on Zoom. I mean, it's amazing how one company has gotten so much business from this.
Yeah. And I think it was Microsoft that said that because they obviously offer that Cloud 365 or whatever it's called. And they said that 3 years of demand or 2 years of demand was brought forward into just one quarter. So what they expected to make in these online businesses that they have over 2 or 3 years, they got that in just 3 months. So like people forcing the transition to cloud and digital products and solutions. But I mean, those bigger companies, a lot of those tech companies were well placed anyway. It was already like Zoom. Like I've been using Zoom for years now, and same with all of the others like Google. And, you know, we built our business on cloud-based products for the exact reason that we wanted to be able to work from anywhere. But there are other smaller businesses that, you know, physical businesses that we're about to get to, which absolutely had nothing to do with the cloud. And all of a sudden they've realized, holy heck, we need to do something, and we need to do something now. And then it's not only that, it's also they've also done something kind of unique. Like they've all kind of put their own spin on something, or like a side hustle or like a little business quirky thing that they had. And they've really just pushed limits on what they thought they could do and what they could charge for. So again, you've done a really good thing with Instagram. Seems people are a lot more forthcoming there than on Twitter. But, I think one of the obvious examples we've spoken about before is I heard of someone north of Sydney who made alcohol, and particularly like gins and that type of thing, because it's very in vogue at the moment. Um, a lot of gins and what have you, and they transitioned to making hand sanitizer because it's alcohol. They can apply that to little pumps and send them out, and it worked really well for them. So that's a really obvious example of how businesses can pivot pretty quickly.
I saw a lot of examples of businesses doing hand sanitizer, everything from, yeah, as you said, the local brewery, and even a lot of skincare brands, because they did have those products and they had the facilities and the clean spaces to produce that stuff. So it was sort of businesses taking what they already had and the facilities they had and the staff and the training, and actually using those materials and those facilities to create something new that was actually helpful. I think it was one of the was it Converse or one of the sneaker brands was actually making face masks as well, which was quite funny. And a lot of people have started side hustles as well, just making face masks and posting them out online via Etsy and Instagram. So it's been, yeah, a lot of people have really just quickly switched to creating things that people actually needed at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's kind of like you have your main business, then you have this ability to transition it to something that can be done online or mailed out to people. But another example with that is there's a really nice gin bar down here in Melbourne. Is gin like a recurring theme in this podcast? Why am I going on about it? But maybe I
It's
have a
getting you
problem.
through the months.
Actually, I'm on red at the moment, but yeah, red wine. But so this gin bar in Melbourne, they're really, really popular just down in Richmond. And obviously their business is ground to a halt in the middle of them trying to do a renovation. And well, they said, well, we'll make the cocktails and the drinks for you, and then we'll send them out. So it's just like a home delivery service, like any other,
Mm,
but they will make the cocktail for you and then deliver it to you on the night. And it's it's just like a little thing that they can do. That's what they were already doing. Then they just adapted it to fit kind of the current environment. Another one that we talk a lot about is PTs, personal trainers, people still trying to be fit and healthy.
mm.
And
And that's
obviously,
one of the hardest hit areas because all the
absolutely.
gyms had to shut.
Yeah, and I mean, fair enough, right? With people touching things and what have you. But with PTs, there are a lot of PTs going online, doing classes through Zoom, all the rest of it. I heard of one, thanks to Nick on Twitter, who said that his friend Anthony, who runs this PT studio in Manly, he's got 100 strong. He turned his PT business obviously into an online business where he can do classes or even mobile. But he also then has branched out into doing to selling kettlebells online. So the
Mm.
weights that you lift, because they're so in demand. People building these home studios. And then another thing was he's now taking it one step further and educating other personal trainers through an online trading system. So these things. The great thing about these types of transitions and pivots, Kate, is that they wouldn't have happened unless there was some sort of catalyst to push them into it.
And a lot of people would never have considered moving their business to do X, Y, Z thing, but it just presented the perfect opportunity to just try. I mean, there's probably a bit of outlay into buying some kettlebells, but
Yeah.
it's definitely an in-demand area. And I know all the major fitness stores were saying they had been completely raided of all their fitness equipment, and it was going to be months before they got more supplies in from overseas, because we don't normally sell that many like kettlebells and dumbbells and all that sort of stuff. And suddenly the demand just peaked. And I found it really interesting to see. I think Amazon were posting about all the things that people are buying that they're not normally buying. And it's just been really interesting to see what did people actually want in a pandemic when they think they're going to be stuck inside their home for months.
And do you remember what any of the things were that caught you out?
It was definitely like baking ingredients, well, because Amazon seemed to have everything. I think this might have been a US perspective, but gym gear, stuff to do haircuts from home. No one was going to the hairdresser. What else? There was a lot of Lego,
Oh
and
yeah.
definitely puzzles and bicycles. But I think everyone, like I'm seeing a lot more people on bikes nowadays, and not everyone knows what they're doing. So I have heard there's been an increase in bike accidents in Australia because of all the new riders on the road.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people say to me, we can't go out and do these things with the kids, so we have to make it as an excuse to be exercising. And what is a
Yeah.
good thing to do with kids? when you're exercising is ride a bike. So yeah, I can definitely see that happens. And if I could just switch to my financial educator hat here, if people have ever wondered what capitalism is, you hear about it in movies. Capitalism is when things present themselves, an opportunity presents itself, and there's demand for a particular service or product. An entrepreneur or someone who has the skills will go in and offer a service and try and make money from that. And so this is the important thing about capitalism as opposed to most other things, is that oftentimes things need to fail in order to spur on innovation. And so when you see things like coronavirus and you hear about people buying bikes, it's because there was a reason for that to happen, and then a supplier came in and filled that void and added value to their life. And that's what we talk about when we talk about capitalism. If you need to ever explain it to anyone, that's the beauty of it, and that's why it works. The reason why you listen to this podcast is because we get value from it. Kate and I love doing it. It's also good for our respective websites and what have you. And this is the type of thing that comes out of a dark period, is innovation when you have capitalism. So I just wanted to air that in there because a lot of people don't understand what it means, but now they probably get front and center a visceral experience and understanding what it means. Anyway, that's an aside. Kate, what's another example of someone who's done a business pivot?
Another one, when I asked my Instagram followers about different ones they'd seen in the community, was a company called Winkle Group. So it's an Australian business that usually does interior store fit outs. And they've pivoted because people aren't fitting out interior stores if no one can go in them at the moment. They've pivoted to producing and selling. I'm not sure if they're producing, but they're definitely selling and fitting sneeze screens and protective screens for office spaces and retail stores. So when you go to the cafe and you go to Woolies, you see all those plastic screens. I had a look at their Facebook page, and they had definitely fitted out a few Aldi's among other different shops. So that's a really interesting thing, because no one ever needed a protective screen in front of the cashier before, and suddenly that was a thing we needed. So businesses had to step up and fill that gap, and some businesses have, and hopefully for them it's quite successfully.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a really good way to add value. Use your existing skill set and supply chain to add value to these big stores. I think that's a really cool thing. Like, they kind of come out of nowhere, right? Like you said, that there was no place had other than 7-Eleven, who occasionally had the wires across so no one could jump across them. Take
And I
money out
guess
of the
the
till.
banks and the banks,
Yeah, the banks,
and like the travel exchange places.
yeah, they're all pretty tightly held behind there. But yeah, for just a general retail store, it makes sense just to put a plastic screen in front of everything. So that's kind of cool. And this isn't the next one that you've got is actually it comes from Frugality and Freedom on Instagram, and I think it's a really cool one.
Yeah, so she sent me a message, but she was a festival manager and she did a lot of project work, and now she's turned into a virtual assistant. So she's helping a lot of different businesses fully online with their projects and work. And I was talking to her the other day, and she said she was working on like video production projects and working with someone on their podcast and doing some editing and social media. So all sorts of different tasks that you can do to free up time in someone's life, but you can do it online. And that's a virtual assistant is probably something that's going to be a growing area, because firms realize they need some extra support for this particular project, but they don't want to employ a full-time person to do it. So they can actually get virtual assistants to help in the times they need the help, and then they can just sort of cease that relationship when they don't need it. So they don't have to deal with having a full-time person.
That's a really cool little trick, and probably something that a lot of people can adopt, right? It's not necessarily, you don't need to come up with this grand plan and become an entrepreneur overnight. You can actually just, take up one of these other, I guess, services and kind of supply your skills there. That's a really cool one. The next one, Kate, that you've got, I've got to say, it's probably something I didn't expect you to come out with.
Yeah, no, this is another suggestion I had from a listener, but it's a company called Jira Jira Retreat, and they do eco accommodation and tourism. So they had, obviously people weren't allowed to go and stay at places anymore. So what they did is, well, they must have already had a wood-fired oven, but they've turned, as the reader put it, full ISO bakery. So they were baking all sorts of beautiful things. I'll put their Instagram page in the show notes. But so since one arm of their business couldn't operate, they were suddenly providing all sorts of baked goods to the local community. And I thought that was an amazing pivot. It was quite different things, but it
Mm.
seemed like it'd been happening quite successfully.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've heard quite a few stories of like chefs or cooks and that type of thing. Those people in those professions, they've been making home cooked meals for people, so they do deliveries. I think that's a really good way to unlock kind of the supply that you have. So you've got this asset that can create something of value, and
Mm,
it's not really living up to its full potential. You can use that, and you can use that as kind of a way to make money. And I think this is a really cool way. I never would have thought I would have heard someone who runs an eco accommodation, um, you know, service to then go and become quote unquote a bakery. Like
mm,
it's unreal. Like I love it. It's great. Talk
yeah.
about innovation during a time of uncertainty.
And another one I'd actually seen from a local place, they were a restaurant usually had like hundreds of people every night. But since that couldn't happen, what they were doing is they were selling takeaway meals and all that sort of stuff, but they were doing isolation packs. So they would drop
Hmm.
off more lunches and dinners every few days for 14 days. So if someone was coming back from overseas, this was a few months ago, and having to isolate, they'd bring them sort of 14 days of meals in sort of multiple tranches to locals. So I thought that was quite good. And they were also doing meal kits. So and then live cooking classes. So they'd drop off the meal kits during the day of all the food items for the 3-course meal. And then you'd log on to Zoom in the evening and cook for 3 hours. It's sort of a cooking lesson and demonstration over Zoom. And everyone in their house would have the same ingredients and you'd all cook together, which I thought was
Hmm.
amazing.
It is. That's just again, like it's when people can get creative like this, it's just unreal, and it's kind of like uplifting because it gives you, I guess, hope in humanity when you're seeing all these pretty scary things on TV and business closures and whatnot.
Yeah.
This next one you've got, Kate, is so I gotta say, I kind of roundabout 2 degrees of freedom know this person. So I'm pretty familiar with what they do already. And I gotta say, this is someone who makes a food service. So we've got cakes, and has already kind of struck it big in terms of Instagram and all that type of stuff on
Mm.
social media, and the marketing really nailed that. I'll let you explain who she is and what she does, but and I guess how she's transitioned recently too. I think it's a really good story.
Yeah, well, her Instagram handle's Sweet Bakes. I couldn't place when I started following her, but I think it was only because of the pandemic. Anyway, but she was a author and she made cakes, she did cooking classes, all sorts of things. She has definitely nailed Instagram. But anyway, during the pandemic, to raise people's spirits, she actually started this cake mail service, and it did gain some press because it sort of inspired a lot of other people to do it as well, cake bakers. But they were selling um, like a little one-off subscription box online, and you would put in your address and everything, and she'd make a range of different small cakes that would last quite a few days and express post them all around Australia. So she was doing hundreds at a time, and everyone, like
Hmm.
especially, I think sometimes she was doing it more around Australia, or other times sort of like Vic in New South Wales, because Australia Post at some points during this last few months was very, very slow. And so everyone could wake up and get some post and have cake inside there to eat. And I definitely recommend checking her out. I just thought it was a wonderful idea, since people were stuck inside, and it just brought joy to a lot of people's life. And she did a Mother's Day special as well. So people could order a Mother's Day gift, and it was a small cake and also a candle, and that got express posted all over Australia. And so people had something sweet and fun to have on Mother's Day.
Hmm. And just to confirm that you can find them on Instagram, find her on Instagram, Sweet Bakes, and she's definitely not the only one that does stuff like this. I've got a friend who, and by the way, they're in if we're called poddies, so people that do podcasts are somehow called a poddy, which sounds a bit weird, but cake makers are called cakers. I learned that on the weekend, and I only found that out because a friend of mine is also a caker, and does these wonderful designs on cakes, and now has adapted to doing it online. And it's just a cool way to kind of inspire people. And first-hand experience, someone has a birthday. More recently, you couldn't go to them and send them a cake for their birthday or send them something nice. So I ended up going around to all these websites that I would normally go to, or restaurants that I normally go to try and send a cake or some cupcakes to one of these people whose birthday it was. But I found that I'd process the order, and then I'd get an email to say, "Sorry, we're not open right now. Your money has been refunded."
Mm.
And so people that actually took it upon themselves to make a service that actually delivered cakes and delivered these products, it's actually just, there's just a massive demand there, because you don't stop eating cake just because you're in coronavirus, right? Probably eat
Yeah.
more of it if you're like me. So, so I think this is a really, really cool thing. Kate, do you have any more? Or is that the last one?
They're probably the main ones I've seen. I mean, a lot of the local businesses have pivoted that I've seen to um, a lot of home deliveries because they can't afford to sort of lose that cut on the Uber Eats app. So they're actually been implementing Shopify or various platforms onto their website very quickly. So I'm sure there's been someone that's been offering those services to help stores that haven't been digital before suddenly have an online ordering system or an online shop. So that's probably another area that's been growing. I haven't heard anyone personally offering that, but I'm sure someone is there behind the scenes. And it's been really interesting. I even saw, I did see some, like Prayer and Market, there was a group organized to, so you could get food from each of the stores and have that delivered to your home. So I think it's really sped up that change into home deliveries for things and services that you might not normally have delivered to your home. And I think it's brought some industries forward many years in terms of home delivery. I think a lot more people are probably going to use Woolies and Coles home delivery in the future, even out of this.
I think that definitely, we talked about at the top of the show there that there are some businesses that what we would call bringing forward the adoption curve. So
Mm.
the uptake of certain services has definitely been sped up. At the same time, we're hearing news this week. I don't want to timestamp this podcast too much, but we're hearing news this week that there are some losers from this. In particularly in media,
Print media.
print media. Yeah, I mean that the writing was on the wall, unfortunately,
Yeah.
for a long time. But then, other services such as restaurants that were probably teetering on profitability for many years and couldn't really make ends meet. They're probably facing some pretty hard times now too. But maybe
Yeah,
they
I
can
know.
go
I
into other
saw
industries.
Hopetoun Tea Room was suffering. That was
Hopetoun Tea Room. What is this?
oh, it's in one of the arcades in the city in Melbourne. But apparently it's like
Oh,
one of the most famous tea rooms, and the windows are so beautifully filled with cakes.
oh.
Anyway, you obviously don't get around town much, but
um,
um, but anyway, I saw an article yesterday, and apparently they're trying to desperately find a buyer. But there's a lot of brands that are really like large brands, like Kiki K and some of the other retail brands that are really struggling. And if they don't find a buyer, they might just disappear for
mm,
good, which I mean is terrible, but it might also provide an opportunity for some sort of savvy entrepreneur to open up in that gap.
yeah, and that's where it comes back to. It is terrible when these businesses go out of business, but if they go out of business, it's because consumers aren't using them in the first place. So
Mm.
there's a reason for that, and that's where someone else comes in and fills the gap. I walked out of the office. Speaking of getting around Melbourne, I walked out of the office earlier this week, and across the road there was a dry cleaners that said proudly 35 years in business, and then that obviously was in there. That's been in the window for a couple of months. And then there was a sign put up this week saying closing down. So, I mean,
Oh,
so you see a lot of things like that where it's very, very sad. And things are going to, I guess, change for them and for the people that
yeah.
run those businesses. I guess if we could, glass half full kind of thinking, if we could apply a more optimistic view of things, well, maybe things are starting to get better. Maybe a lot of these businesses don't need to go out of the business. Maybe there are new fantastic things that come out of coronavirus that, as we've shown in this program, that are actually going to be for the better. So, I think if as we go about our business, just try and be a bit more optimistic and just focus on the positive things that come across your plate each day, rather than the things that are, I guess, a bit sad. But
Hmm.
Kate, I think you've provided some great inspiration for people to to jump on and to maybe rally behind. So we'll put all of the links.
Yeah, support these smaller businesses. So I would definitely put them in the show notes as well. And I think it's just sort of an opportunity to consider that if you are starting a business or you're a side hustler or a freelancer, how can you keep yourself flexible to embrace the new changes and pivot and take advantage of things when sometimes the timing is really right to do this particular thing, and you could really turn your business or idea into a great direction.
Yep. And if you have any ideas or if you've done this recently and you didn't see our Instagram or Twitter posts, please write into us. You can write into us at podcast@rask.com.au. Write into us and tell us about what you've done. We're happy to talk about it on the program. I'm happy to give your business or yourself a shout out if it's something that's really interesting. So please, by all means, we love to hear from you and to hear your stories and I guess the positive things that you're doing with your business.
Absolutely.
Kate, how can people find out more about you?
You can find me at Twitter and Instagram at howtomoney.aus and howtomoney.online.
Cool. And I'm Owen Rask on Twitter and Owen Rask AU on Instagram, or you can find us at www.rask.com.au. And of course, you can take one of our courses or anything like that online too. Cool, Kate. I really appreciate your time today. I think it was a really enjoyable episode. So thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, guys.